If a conflict in one region can raise oil prices, make food, transport, daily living more expensive, followed by a winter of unprecedented domestic upheaval and a spring of direct military confrontation, the crisis in Iran has reached a fever pitch and has made the world question, are we already living in a world of global economic war? Let's hear it out from an insider. Today we have Ms. Delshad among us. She has a lot to her identity, including being a software manager, crypto expert, digital archivist. But above all, she is the voice of the people of Iran. Hello, ma'am. Welcome to Golpokutir. My name is Bipasha, and I'll be your host for the day.
First of all, thank you for having me and using your platform to spread the truth about Iran and 90 million Iranians living there.
Of course. We are obliged to have you on board with us today. So without further ado, let's get started with what we believe is the crux of the issue. While there was a long-standing tension between Iran and Israel over the past few years, what do you think were the underlying cause, social, political, economical, that suddenly triggered the mass protest in December 2025? Why did these long-standing tensions suddenly escalate? And how many innocent lives were lost during these mass protests?
The short truth is that the protests did not come out of nowhere. They were the result of years of pressure finally blowing the lid off. In late 2025, Iran had a collapsing rial, and official inflation was at 42.5% in December, widening inequality, corruption, and anger at a system where ordinary people were getting poorer while the political security elite stayed protected. The first protests began in the bazaar, Tehran's bazaar, and it was all because of the crashing currency and soaring prices. And then it spread because the economic pain was sitting on top of a long-standing political repression. The reason it happened at that time is because when a currency loses nearly half its value in a year because of the dollar and all the sanctions and what have you, daily life becomes unbearable fast. And it turns old frustration into immediate anger and survival. And once bazaar traders, workers, and ordinary families start moving at the same time, a regime reads that as a threat to control, since they know the truth of the oppression they've caused for 47 years. So they don't just read it as a complaint about prices. They know what it's truly about, even if tanking currency initiated it at this point. The intel that we've got so far from hospitals, which at first was 20 to 30,000 people killed, and now with the intel that President Donald Trump announced, it's 45,000. And to be honest, I believe it's the minimum. And the reason I'm saying that is because a regime that kills and executes people more than any other state, they were out of body bags. So the honest answer is the toll is probably far above these numbers because of blackout conditions and suppression. And let's not forget that the internet blackout when the massacre happened has silenced 90 million people who cannot speak the truth and has begged us on the outside to be their voice and tell their stories.
Well, I truly believe they've chosen the best people to voice out their concern. Moving on. When you mentioned about the economic crisis and currency crashing, what first came to my mind was the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or as we know it, the JCPOA. This was signed in 2015 to limit Iran's uranium enrichment program in exchange of uplifting its economic condition. In 2018, unfortunately, US backed out of this deal. Heavy sanctions were again imposed on Iran, and in exchange, they decided to stop following the key limits. Now, the real question is, in April 11, 2021, why do you think Israel carried out a sabotage attack on the Natanz nuclear facility? And how did this timing affect Iran's uranium enrichment program and an ongoing effort to revive the JCPOA?
Well, Israel has long believed that diplomacy was buying Iran time. Truth be told, Israel knows and has known the truth about Iran and its ideological ruling. I believe other countries and governments know this as well, but since they're constantly making deals with this regime and getting oil at very cheap prices, they're not willing to speak up nor support Israel. They're okay with cheap prices at the cost of Iranian lives. And now to get back to the April 11th Natanz incident, while talks were underway in Vienna to revive the JCPOA, and it came right after Iran had showcased advanced centrifuges and, as the IAEA reported, further enrichment escalation. The sabotage took place while Iran and world powers were trying to salvage that nuclear deal. So the logic is pretty straightforward. If Israel believed Iran was advancing its enrichment capability while negotiating to buy time, then a sabotage strike would serve two purposes at once. First, delay the nuclear program, and second, signal that Israel would not let diplomacy create a done deal when it comes to their nuclear power. So basically, disruption is pretty much the only way to stop threats when your opposing party is a radical ideology that doesn't see the world the way other governments do.
So, talking about warfare diplomacy, in 1989, right after the Iran-Iraq war, to what extent do you think Iran provided military, strategic, and financial support to groups like Hezbollah and Hamas? And what was the geopolitical motivation behind these supports?
They supported them in a very large extent. Iran's support wasn't just symbolic. It included money, weapons, training, strategic coordination, and political backing. Iran has been giving Hezbollah weapons and money, estimating hundreds of millions of dollars annually in recent years. And U.S. Treasury actions in 2025 also described Iranian and Lebanon-based facilitators coordinating financial transfers for Hezbollah. And Hamas has had military backing because Hamas serves as another front of pressure against Israel and the U.S.-aligned regional order. These are all Iran's broader network, and they work as a way to project power beyond its borders through armed partners. So the motivation was geopolitical and ideological at the same time. Destroy Israel, pressure the US, and expand Iran's influence in the Middle East. And also build a ring of allied armed actors that lets Tehran fight indirectly instead of conventionally. This is how Iran's regional strategy has worked for decades.
Okay. So, if I have to get into the real root cause for this conflict between the US and Iran, what do you think is the primary reason? Is it because of control over oil resources, dominance in West Asia? Or do you think there is a deeper historical event like the 1953 Iranian coup d'etat and, of course, a long-standing geopolitical tension, as you've mentioned?
That's a good question. The real answer is all of the above, but not equally at the same time. If you want the deepest root, you can't ignore the 1953 coup. The U.S. State Department's historical record confirms that the U.S. involvement in removing Mossadegh, which was, for those who don't know, Iran's democratically elected prime minister who nationalized the oil industry and was overthrown. That event became part of the Iranian state anti-America memory and political identity. Then came 1979, the revolution, the hostage crisis at the American embassy, the Islamic Republic's anti-America ideology started, U.S. sanctions started, Iran's proxy network got to work, and the nuclear file was created. So today's conflict is not just about the bomb, and not just about oil. Nuclear weapons are the sharpest security trigger. Oil and shipping routes matter because they affect the global economy, as we just saw when they closed the Strait of Hormuz. Regional dominance matters because Iran and the US have backed opposing power structures across West Asia. But the hostility is also built on decades of mistrust, humiliation, revolution, intervention, and retaliation. So if someone says it's only about nuclear weapons or it's only about oil, I have to say that the truth is a layered conflict that includes history, ideology, power, deterrence, and strategic geography.
All right. So something that again comes to my mind is after Nixon shock ended the gold standards, why do you think US in 1974 approached Saudi Arabia to sell and price oil exclusively in dollars? And how do you think this agreement where the surplus dollars were reinvested in US bonds in exchange of America's military service serve America's economic and political interests?
When the US couldn't back the dollar with gold anymore in 1971, when Nixon was president, he made a new deal. Oil would now be sold in dollars, right? So if you wanted energy, you had to have dollars. And if you had extra dollars, you would send them right back to the US. And that's how the system stayed alive, pretty much. The US and Saudi framework made this happen. And the important part is that the version people repeat online is often too refined. It was not one magical document that single-handedly forced every barrel on earth to be sold only in dollars forever. History is more complicated than that. But the broad effect was that we got to a stronger global demand for the dollar, deeper treasury financing, and tighter US-Saudi strategic alignment. So America's gain was pretty obvious: to lock a major oil power onto a US-led security order.
Talking about America's interest, how did the geopolitical tensions of the Cold War, particularly in 1957, after the US-Iran nuclear agreement, Atom for Peace program, influence America's decision to share nuclear technology with Iran and assist in establishing the Tehran Research Center for Scientific Development?
Okay, so let's go back to the 1950s. Back then, Iran was not treated by Washington as an enemy. It was treated as a strategic Cold War partner. The 1957 US-Iran Civil Nuclear Agreement was part of Eisenhower's Atoms for Peace program, which aimed to spread civilian nuclear science under US influence rather than leave technological ground to Soviet influence. The agreement is documented in the UN treaty record, and the IAEA traces the broader program to that Atoms for Peace framework. Iran's early nuclear institutions, including the Tehran Nuclear Research Center, were built in that context of scientific modernization, prestige, and Western alignment under the Shah. So yeah, Cold War geopolitics mattered a lot. Washington was willing to help build a civilian nuclear base in Iran because Iran at that time, in that era, was seen as a friendly state, not a radical opponent.
Thank you so much for briefing us about the Cold War and Iran's past position with other worldly powers. Now, coming back to the current situation, something that makes me very curious is India exports about 85 to 90% of its crude oil. So, do you think India will be exposed to the rising oil prices due to this 2026 conflict? And how will that affect daily inflations and daily living costs?
Truthfully, India is very vulnerable. As you mentioned, India imports around 90% of its oil, according to Reuters. And both Reuters and the World Bank have warned that the current West Asia crisis raises risks to inflation, growth, the rupee, and the current account. That means when oil jumps, it doesn't stay in some abstract market chart. It hits fuel, transport, logistics, food distribution, airline costs, fertilizers, and household budgets. Even where government tax cuts soften the blow, the pressure still leaks through the economy with a delay. And inflation has stayed relatively contained so far, but we have economy experts that are already warning about lagged effects. So, yeah, India is exposed. Not because it's weak, but because a country this large can't fully protect itself from a major supply shock moving through the Strait of Hormuz.
Okay, that sounds a bit scary, to be honest. But do you think India can maintain its strategic autonomy with both US and Russia and Iran during this 2026 conflict? Or do you think India will finally have to lean towards one particular side to maintain energy stability?
Right now, the evidence shows that India is still trying very hard to avoid choosing. They're balancing relations with the US, Israel, Iran, and Russia. But more importantly, they're actively diversifying their oil supply. India has already ramped up imports from places like Russia and now even Venezuela because relying on the Persian Gulf has become a real risk. So basically, India has to be flexible to survive. And my thoughts are that India will stay neutral as long as the oil keeps flowing and as long as the US gives them room to operate. But the moment supply gets seriously disrupted, that's when India can't stay neutral anymore, because in a real energy crisis, you have to do what you have to do to survive.
All right. Coming to a very important question. I've seen you've mentioned about internet blackouts and restrictions. In 2026, when we almost need internet for everything, why do you think the Iranian government restrict internet and shut it down during these mass protests? And how does controlling digital communication impact public mobilization?
Yeah, most people understand that the government in Iran wants to silence the truth of what is going on and has happened. It's that simple. Not only about the massacre of more than 30,000 people in 2 days and the ongoing killings and executions as we speak, but also for what has happened since they came to power in 1979. Shutting down the internet does 4 things, okay? It slows protest coordination. They can't reach each other to plan, to cooperate. It hides the scale of killings and arrests. It isolates families from each other and from the outside world. And it forces people back onto regime-monitored domestic systems where censorship and surveillance are easier. So we cannot inform them about the reality happening. And their local television just keeps spreading them lies about what's really going on. And that is why the Iranian diaspora, as myself, has been so loud and vocal, demonstrating, creating truthful content for social media. And we are the voice of the voiceless in Iran right now. Whatever they were chanting in Iran at that time was Pahlavi barmigarde, which means that Pahlavi, the son of the former Shah of Iran, will return. And has been what we've been chanting to be their voice and to tell their story and their truth. So basically, when a regime shuts off the internet, it is telling you something very, very clearly. It is afraid not only of people in the streets, but of the truth leaving the country. The truth is they didn't just take the Iranian people hostage in their homeland. They started a war with the Iranian people who've been living in an open-air prison for 47 years. That's the real war that has been going on for so very long and has been forgotten at this stage and point in time. Wars are not always with weapons, tortures, and threats. This war is half information war. 47 years ago, they started spreading propaganda through big news media outlets like CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera, and many more. When President Donald Trump gets questions from CNN and says fake news, he's not joking around. He knows exactly what he is talking about and dealing with. They have so many groups around the world lobbying for the Islamic Republic and spreading their lies, pretending to be the Iranian people and their voices, like Nayak, for instance. So the real truth had no way of getting out as long as they paid the media outlet to show the lies they wanted to show the world. And this made it easier for some countries in Europe to turn a blind eye and use the lies, even though they knew the truth, to turn a blind eye to the blood that has been shed throughout the years. You know, as long as they could get good and cheap deals, that mattered more, because we know now that to them, deals matter more than lives and stability matters more than justice. The media pretty much worked in their favor to justify their inactions. So the current internet shutdown is just a modern way of doing the exact same thing that they've already done for 47 years. But this is at a critical moment since Israel and the US are involved, and obviously they have more intel that justifies their actions. But as long as the world doesn't know, they can judge and make Israel and the US the bad guys. The truth will only get out when the Islamic Republic is finished and gone for good. When 90 million Iranians can freely speak up and tell the world how the US and Israel saved them from this evil, because it seems like they don't believe the diaspora and call us Zionists and Mossad agents, which is such a disrespect to all the innocent civilians that got massacred and their families, to name us that. Truth about so many things will come out, actually, and that's also when the war against the regime in Iran will make sense. And by then, more people will understand that Trump and Bibi Netanyahu won't be seen as the bad guys and will be seen for what they did.
All right. Well, as we almost move towards the end of the interview, I'd like to thank you for your time today. And I'd like to end this interview with one last question. If there's anything about the current situation in Iran that you'd like the world to remember, what would that be?
First of all, I have a few. I would say do not confuse the Iranian people with the Islamic Republic. That confusion has poisoned global understanding for decades. The people have been paying for that lie with blood. When you hear people say the regime kills its own people, I mean, it's half true. I would say it's wrong. We're not their people. We are Iranians, and they are radical Islamists that have taken that land. Secondly, I have to say that when this radical ideology of the Islamic Republic falls, all the other terrorist groups in the countries around them oppressing the civilians in those areas will fall as well, since there will no longer be anybody funding them, protecting them, and coordinating them. There will be no more endless proxy wars, no more militias holding countries hostage, no more civilians paying the price for someone else's agenda. And this current war that Iranians call a rescue mission is the precondition for stability in the Middle East. Thirdly, right now, what is extremely important to understand is that parts of the woke left are in reality empowering the worst elements on all sides. Some actually because they believe all the propaganda, some because they're actually paid by the regime, and some simply because they hate President Donald Trump so much that they're supporting anything opposing him, even if it's pure evil, obviously. They are so blinded and don't even want to learn about the opposing part before making up their minds. And when you ask them why they hate him so much, they don't even know what to say. They can't answer that question. So the woke are not at all that woke. They are lost behind words. And my final message would be that right now, what seems to be chaotic is actually saving the world from a radical ideology that has a main goal, one main goal, to spread all over the world. And Iranians are happy because they have lived in the hell that is now being stopped. So most important message to the world would be Iranians are happy that this is happening. And anyone saying otherwise does not stand with the Iranian people.
We started this interview by asking one simple question. Are we already living in a world of global economic war? As we stand at this precarious crossroad where global economy and local lives are constantly held hostage due to global political maneuvering, it's clear that the digital shifts that we've discussed are irreversible. But the real question lies is whether this is the beginning of a new worldly order or simply the escalation of a bigger storm. Ma'am, thank you so much for joining us today and providing such vital clarity on these complex issues. My name is Bipasha, and thank you for watching this deep dive into the 2026 Iran crisis.